Welcome to the program. I'm Lee Sales. Well, the United States President noted today that success than the fact that much of the world learned of his device he invented. The tech guru was only 56, died after a long struggle. A genius of innovation and marketing, and that made Apple unique in the business world. The company's staff and customers have had an almost cult-like devotion to it, in many ways built around the persona of Jobs himself. The question now is, can Apple have the same sort of influence in the post-Jobs era? In a moment, I'll talk to Steve Jobs' biographer, but first this report from Deborah Cornwall on the legacy of a man sometimes described as the Thomas Edison of our times.
Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did.
For 7 years, Steve Jobs has wasted away before our eyes.
And something that's this thick and weighs 1.3 pounds.
But staring down certain death did nothing to dim Jobs' creative genius, prompting him to even more remarkable feats. First with the launch of iPhone in 2007, then his final legacy.
And we call it the iPad.
The Australian editor of CNET magazine joined online media across the globe today as they scrambled to pay tribute to their icon.
His impact on the industry has just been phenomenal, and the idea of the technology industry without Steve Jobs, I think is actually, it's going to take quite a while for that to sink in and what that's going to mean and how things are going to change.
A college dropout, Jobs always prided himself on being a change agent. To innovate, he said, was to take the risky, scary path, the path less travelled. Jobs was just 20 when he first set up Apple Computer in his garage in the late 70s. Teamed up with friend Steve Wozniak, the pair went on to develop the world's first successful personal computer. But it was his Macintosh computer in 1984 which changed the way the world communicated.
Hello, I am Macintosh.
Even Bill Gates, the man who was to become his most formidable rival, was astounded by Jobs' creation.
Well, to create a new standard, it takes something that's not just a little bit different. It takes something that's really new and really captures people's imagination. And the Macintosh, of all the machines I've ever seen, is the only one that meets that standard.
The new graphical user interface and putting a mouse into people's homes, I mean, this was just completely something that nobody had seen before, was incredibly revolutionary.
Despite the extraordinary success of the Apple Macintosh, Jobs' relationship with management soured so badly, within a year he'd been sacked.
What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating. I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. Months or so before I really
Jobs
quit.
continued to innovate. A year later, he'd revolutionised computer animation for another of his companies, Pixar, which showcased the world's first computerised animations with the blockbusting movie Toy Story.
Draw. Oh! Got me again. Etch, you've been working on that draw.
By the time Jobs had returned to the helm at Apple in 1997, the company was near bankruptcy, completely overshadowed by the rise and rise of Bill Gates' Microsoft. Within a year, the charismatic skivvy-wearing Jobs had revived Apple's fortunes.
I think today, you know, in the desktop computing space, Windows is still far and away on top, but Apple has really caught up a lot of ground, and Apple is the #1 technology company in the world now.
This is Vista. It's my new operating system. It sucks! You suck! I'm cool and you're a pathetic old man! Hey!
While Apple may not have the reach of Microsoft, its clever marketing strategy has divided the world into two tribes: cool Apple fanboys versus nerdy PC Microsoft users.
Nerd! Steve, what are you doing? Well, I'm just reminding everyone that PCs are for fart huffers and Macs get you laid.
But the cult-like fervour of many Apple believers is sure to be tested without Jobs at the helm.
I think when it comes to the roadmap for the years ahead, I think Steve Jobs will have still had a hand in a lot of what's going to happen over the next few years. Apple simply cannot be the same company without Steve Jobs in those meetings and really driving that team forward.
Death is very likely the single best invention of life. It's life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new.
And a short time ago, I was joined from Sacramento by technology writer Jeffrey Young. He's authored 2 books on Apple and Steve Jobs. Mr. Young, do you think that Apple can be as successful in the post-Steve Jobs era as it has been in the past decade or so?
I don't think so. I think that you're going to see a change in Apple. Much of Apple's success is because of an emotional reaction that many people have with Steve and with his products. He's really a remarkable human being and somebody who transcends the technology space. And because of that, people feel a real connection to Apple that I think is going to dissipate with time. Also, Apple's going to be very hard-pressed to produce the kind of products and the excitement that they have under Steve. Steve is a unique guy. He's a perfectionist and a driven perfectionist who really has a confidence in his own talent that no one else could have. He's had 30 years at the pinnacle of the technology industry. He's changed many industries, and that is just unheard of anywhere else. And so I just don't think you can replace that in any kind of short-term sense. I think Apple's big problems are going to be in the sort of midterm, the next 5 years. I think Apple right now has a very good product line. It's going to do very well. Steve set them up very well. And but going forward, they're going to have a hard time replicating that and continuing to succeed like that.
Should we read anything into the fact that when Apple unveiled the new iPhone 4S this week, that the market was a bit underwhelmed and that the share price was down about 5% at one point?
Yes, I think you're seeing the kind of effect that Steve's extraordinary success has had on Apple. Apple, in other words, the expectations for Apple are that it will always top itself with another extraordinary product. That's a very tough act to follow. You can't keep topping yourself with products like that. This is an incremental product. Apple will continue to retain those and put those products out, but it's just not exciting to the market. And so much of their stock is built on hype and excitement and thrill and irrational investing that I think that it's going to be very, very hard for them going forward.
Tell us about your personal experiences with Steve Jobs, including the first time that you met him.
Well, it was a fascinating meeting. It fits everything that all the stories you've ever heard of Steve, of driven insanity. I was walking through the Bandley building at the Apple headquarters in Cupertino. We'd started a magazine. This is before the Macintosh came out. We'd started a magazine that was going to be about the Macintosh. I was a newspaper reporter in the area and had joined the team as one of the founding editors. And Steve caught sight of me inside the Bandley area where I'd been given a permission to enter. This is a secret project. He stopped in his tracks. He was talking to a couple of other people, stopped in his tracks, put his face in my face and yelled at me, "Who the hell are you?" And I told him who I was, and he then proceeded to grill me about what my bona fides were. What I'd written, where I'd published, who I was, what I was intending to write. And after about 3 or so minutes of intense questioning, he lost interest in me completely. Never really engaged with me again, even though for 6 months I spent hours and days inside the Apple headquarters building where the Mac was being developed. And I was able to just sort of join the meetings and be part of the whole team, but he never really paid me any more attention because he'd gotten what he wanted, which he'd found out who I was, and from then on I wasn't moving the Macintosh forward. I was an outsider, a hanger-on, a journalist, a writer, a reporter, but I wasn't a member of his all-hallowed Macintosh team.
So with the sort of style that you describe him as having, how did he engender so much loyalty from his staff and from fans of the company?
Well, because, you see, Steve is a perfectionist, but he's also a perfectionist with taste. And so because he's a perfectionist with taste, he can drive people who have great talent to do things beyond what they might be able to do otherwise. And that's what he does, is he inspires you to show him up. One of Steve's favorite phrases is brain dead. And he would say that about you no matter almost what you were doing. If he thought something was stupid, he'd tell you it was brain dead. And he said this over and over, and it became his sort of pet phrase. It was, and you know, he would tell everybody this, that he hated, that he just, you know, you were brain dead. That was a brain dead idea. It was a brain dead decision. It was a brain dead design. And that intensity that pursued you all the time either drove you to do greater and greater stuff, i.e. go way beyond anything you could ever do before, or it drove you to leave because you couldn't stand it. He had an extraordinary design ability, had a knowledge of electronics deeper than anyone usually remembers. Steve, you got to remember, grew up in the Silicon Valley culture. Worked in surplus electronics parts stores as a teenager. He knew what parts to buy. He knew the price of every part in the Apple I and Apple II. And he was famous in Silicon Valley for telling people to sharpen their pencils, to get a better deal, to shave a penny, a tenth of a cent off a component. People don't remember that part of Steve, but Steve was an extraordinarily good manufacturing guy, an operations guy. He could make computers really cheaply. That's a very important skill, something that Apple has always done well with. They've always had very high margins, even though their products are highly priced, but their margins have always been good because their cost of goods is always remarkably low.
How do you think that history is going to look at Steve Jobs? Will he be ranked alongside other great innovators like Thomas Edison and Leonardo da Vinci, for example?
Yes, I think he's going to be in the rank. I wouldn't say Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, Da Vinci is a grand artist, a transcendent artist. Steve isn't that. Steve's an entrepreneur, an impresario, somebody who can see great ideas, can inspire them to be even better, and inspire the people behind those ideas to do greater work than they've ever done before. And he had the personal charisma and the power to bring those products to market. I think it's an Edison type of thing. Now, Edison, on the other hand, was an extraordinary inventor as well. So I'm not sure they're correspondent. The person that I think is the closest to Steve in the history of modern business, is Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes the difference between them was that Steve was born as an orphan and was raised by a blue-collar family in the Bay Area. His dad was a machinist. Howard Hughes' father owned a machine tool company in Texas, and Howard Hughes was born rich. He was always rich. But in the breadth of the products that Howard Hughes produced, I think he's the only person who is close to Steve. Steve has made enormous contributions to the music industry, to the computer industry, to the movie industry, and animation industries. I think you can argue that Hughes, with his helicopters and his movie innovations, had a similar breadth of influence. So, I mean, I think that's the only person I've been able to come up with, and I've spent a lot of time trying to find someone who is similar to Steve in history. And I think Howard Hughes is the closest that I can come up with.
Jeffrey Young, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. My pleasure.